We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary. That was the line delivered with a polite shrug and a hint of a smirk, by Ryan Caldwell, the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer of Veltria Housing. It was a phrase rehearsed to sound like a business decision, not a betrayal. Ryan leaned back in his chair across the glass conference table on the 23rd floor of Veltria's downtown Toronto headquarters. The city skyline glimmered behind him, but I wasn't looking at the view. I was looking at the man who had been with the company less than 6 months and was now casually erasing 18 years of my life's work. I didn't flinch, I said, my voice calm, too calm, maybe. Beside him, Monique Tremblay from HR slid a glossy folder across the table. Your severance package is detailed inside 2 months' salary, plus vacation days accrued. We'd also like to discuss the possibility of a short-term consulting agreement to help transition your knowledge to the new team. I opened the folder, glanced at the numbers, then closed it. Thank you, I said evenly. Is that all? Ryan seemed almost disappointed. He was probably expecting outrage, maybe a threat of legal action, or a dramatic monologue about loyalty. But there was nothing left to say. Most people in your position have questions, concerns. Monique offered her tone light. I gave a small shrug. It seems straightforward to me. Ryan exchanged a glance with her, clearly unsettled by my composure. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't calm. I was just done. There's a difference. Ryan leaned forward again. We really hope you'll consider helping with the transition. A few weeks of consulting, maybe 4 to 6, the new team could use guidance. Your system's architecture is, well, let's just say unique. I smiled faintly. I'll think about it. We stood, shook hands, and that was it. 18 years reduced to a single cardboard box. I packed it in silence, framed photos. A few books, a model train from my desk drawer that had been a gift from my daughter when she was 9. My colleagues kept their distance, their eyes avoiding mine. They weren't cold, just afraid they were next. In times of cost-cutting, experience becomes expensive. I nodded to Mark Fournier, our database administrator, and one of the few who'd always had my back. He didn't say a word, just gave me a look that said everything. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. The whole team's freaking out. They have no idea what they're doing. I didn't reply. I drove home in the quiet of early afternoon traffic flowing gently along the Gardiner Expressway. The city behind me. Our home sat near the edge of Lake Ontario, just past Mississauga, tucked into a modest neighborhood of mature trees and deep porches. Lydia was on the deck when I arrived, pruning the autumn blooms that were stubbornly clinging to life. She looked up, eyes softening. It's done, I nodded. She came over and placed a hand on my arm. What will you do now? I exhaled slowly. Something will turn up. We sat in silence as the wind skimmed across the lake's surface, turning it to liquid bronze beneath the setting sun. I poured a glass of bourbon and watched the water ripple against the shore. No anger, no despair, just a strange, hollow clarity. What Ryan Caldwell didn't realize, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just managed Veltria's systems. I had built them from the ground up. I'd been there when the company was still called Bayfield Properties, when Arthur Bayfield himself ran it with a handshake and a promise. Back then, we had 4 buildings, a fax machine, and a dial-up modem. Arthur had hired me out of a consulting contract in Kingston, telling me, we're growing. We need someone to build it right. So I did. Over nearly 2 decades, I designed and implemented every layer of the infrastructure: tenant application, portals, maintenance, scheduling systems, real-time payment processing. No one had bothered to fund a proper documentation team. Too costly, they said. Next quarter. That quarter never came. So I coded the redundancies myself, wove in the firewalls, and memorized every inch of the architecture. Like a builder memorizes the creak of every floorboard, in a home he's lived in. And now, someone who didn't even know what questions to ask was in charge. I looked out across the lake, the sky awash of rust and gold. Somewhere behind me in a downtown office tower, people were already poring over code they didn't understand, trying to piece together a system that didn't come with a manual. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel defeated. I felt still. And for now, that was enough. Back when Veltria Housing was still called Bayfield Properties, the entire IT department consisted of me 2 desktops, a barely functioning fax machine, and a DSL line that worked better if no one used the microwave. That was 2005, and I had just wrapped up a short-term consulting project in Kingston, when Arthur Bayfield called me out of the blue. "I need someone who can build something real," he said. "We're planning to grow, and I don't want a cobbled-together mess 5 years from now." His voice had weight. It wasn't the voice of a man trying to impress. It was the voice of a man trying to do things properly. I liked that within 3 weeks I was in Toronto, sitting in the corner of a drafty office above a dry cleaner, mapping out infrastructure on a whiteboard, while the smell of starch floated in through the vents. Arthur wasn't a tech guy, but he had a gut instinct for people build what we'll need in 10 years. "Not just today," he said. "Most companies want the opposite, quick fixes, short-term band-aids. Arthur let me plan long-term, so I did. We started with 4 apartment complexes and a dozen staff. By the time I finished building the first version of our tenant management system, we'd already outgrown it. So I tore it apart and built again, better, faster, leaner. Every time we added properties, I revised the architecture to scale. When automated background checks became essential, I coded the integration myself. When payment processing needed real-time reconciliation, I built the interface by hand. Every new feature was layered into the system, with intention, no duct tape, no shortcuts. We didn't have a documentation team. I asked for one more than once, but it was always the same answer. "Let's get through this quarter first." Then another quarter. Then another. Soon, the knowledge lived almost entirely in my head, supported by sparse notes and a few internal guides I'd written on weekends. I didn't love that I knew it was risky. But when the budget keeps getting cut, and you're the only one keeping things running, you do what you can. Arthur understood that, even when he didn't always agree. He listened. We worked well together. But 5 years ago, he retired and moved out west to Victoria. His son, Connor Bayfield, stepped in and ran the company for a short while before selling it to a private equity firm based out of Vancouver. That's when things began to change. Slowly, at first, new executives. Different KPIs. Suddenly, everything was about quarterly returns. Stability became secondary to cost efficiency. The new board kept me on reluctantly. I think only because the system ran so smoothly, they didn't want to touch it. But that didn't stop them from surrounding me with a carousel of consultants and digital transformation strategists, most of whom were fresh out of MBA programs and had never managed a system longer than a product cycle. They'd sit in meetings and nod, while I explained why their off-the-shelf solutions wouldn't integrate with our custom back-end. They'd recommend cloud platforms that couldn't handle our hybrid infrastructure. One even suggested we just migrate everything to an app. For 63 properties in 4 provinces with legacy data going back nearly 2 decades. I pushed back, but I did it quietly. I gave them documents, diagrams, proof of what would break, but they didn't want details. They wanted speed. Lydia noticed the shift before I did. "They're phasing you out," she said over dinner one night. "All these meetings without you, these new hires, their positioning." I waved it off. "They need me." "No one else understands how everything connects." She looked at me deadpan. Exactly. That might be the problem. I didn't want to believe it at the time, but she was right. 3 months before I was let go, They hired Ryan Caldwell, CTO. They said new blood, new vision. He came in with a sharp suit, sharper smile, and an attitude that screamed disruption. Ryan was the kind of leader who thought reading 3 white papers on microservices gave him an edge over 2 decades of system evolution. He asked me for a high-level overview of the infrastructure. I provided it, short, clear, focused. He smiled and said it was impressive. 2 days later, 3 junior engineers showed up on my floor, shadowing me under the guise of knowledge transfer. They were smart, enthusiastic, and completely unprepared. I answered their questions. I even liked some of them, but it was obvious they didn't understand the interdependencies, the silent redundancies, the invisible fail-safes built into the codebase. One of them asked why we didn't just run everything through a cloud-based enterprise suite. I remember replying, because if that suite goes down, so does our entire operation. He looked puzzled. Another asked why certain functions had overlapping triggers, because if one fails, the other compensates without anyone knowing there was even a problem. Silence. I wasn't trying to gatekeep, I was trying to teach. But it's hard to teach experience, especially when no one sees the value of time-tested systems anymore. Still, I thought maybe Ryan would come around. Maybe once he understood the nuances, he'd see that what we had wasn't legacy. It was resilient. But then came the calendar invite quarterly check-in. I should have seen it coming. When I walked into that boardroom and heard the words cost efficiency, I knew. Not because of my performance, not because of failure, just because I'd become a line item too expensive for a spreadsheet culture. 2 weeks after I left Veltria, the silence began to break. I was sitting in my home office mid-morning, a second coffee in hand, and my resume open in a Word doc I hadn't updated since the Harper government. The birds were active outside the lake. Calm, and for once, I didn't feel the need to check system logs or inbox alerts. Retirement, no, but a pause. Maybe then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I expected, but not this soon. Ryan Caldwell. I watched it ring. Watched it go to voicemail. The icon blinked. I hit play. His voice came through with false cheer layered over urgency. Hi Ethan, it's Ryan. Hope you're doing well. We've had a minor hiccup with the tenant portal. The junior team's working through it, but they're having trouble following some of your architecture. Just wondering if you could spare a few minutes. Should be a quick consult. I deleted the message. An hour later, another call, Monique Tremblay. Then again, then Ryan twice more. Each time the voicemails grew a little less composed. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, just principle. They wanted quick fixes, not long-term value. Now they were finding out the cost of shortcuts. By early evening, I was on the back deck. Lydia beside me reading. I watched the sun lean west over Lake Ontario, the orange sky folding into steel blue. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mark Fournier. System's been down all day. Maintenance requests stalled. Ryan's losing it. I smiled, but not cruelly. Just quietly, I'd warned them years ago about the need for documentation, for backups that weren't just automated but verified, for staff training that covered not just what the system did, but why it did it. The next morning, I got the real call. Ethan. Monique's voice was tight but professional. We'd like to formally offer you a short-term consulting engagement to assist in resolving some of the current system challenges. Compensation would be generous. I leaned back in my chair. How generous? 300 per hour, 4-hour minimum per day. I'll think about it, I said, then ended the call. Lydia brought over a fresh cup of coffee and sat across from me. What are you thinking? She asked. I stared out the window. I think they're finally learning what I'm worth. Over the next 3 days, the calls didn't stop. Ryan, Monique, even Connor Bayfield, Arthur's son, still a board advisor. The panic was real now. The portal remained down. Payment processing had failed. Thousands of residents couldn't log in, couldn't report issues, couldn't pay rent. The help desk had become a war zone. The team tried restoring from backup only to find that the automated process hadn't been configured properly. Not since I'd left. And I hadn't left behind step-by-step instructions. Not for a system I'd begged them to document themselves for years. On day 4, something unexpected arrived in my inbox. An email from Lucas Baudouin, CTO and co-founder of Devlin Systems, a mid-sized property tech company based in Ottawa. Subject line: opportunity to collaborate. Message body: Hi Ethan. I heard about your departure from Veltria through the grapevine. We've long admired your system's resilience. We're expanding and looking to re-architect our core infrastructure. Would you be open to a conversation? I replied, suggesting a coffee shop in downtown Kingston, neutral ground between Toronto and Ottawa. He agreed. That evening, Lydia and I were prepping dinner: salmon, herbed rice, roasted carrots, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Ryan Caldwell standing on my porch. His suit was wrinkled, his designer glasses slightly crooked, his usual composed posture fractured by desperation. Ethan, he began, I apologize for showing up like this, but we have a critical emergency. The entire system is down. Nothing's working. Our team is stuck. The consultants we brought in don't understand your architecture. The board has authorized me to offer you whatever rate you require. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. That sounds serious. It is. We're bleeding. The payment database is corrupt. Clients are threatening to leave. We're offering $500 per hour. Just name your terms. I paused, not for effect, but for reflection. I thought about the cardboard box in my garage, about the 18 years reduced to a few items, about Arthur Bayfield, about my warnings ignored, about Ryan's smirk the day he let me go. I'm sorry to hear that, I said softly. But I have an interview tomorrow. Something will turn up. Then I closed the door gently behind me. The kettle whistled. Lydia didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to that night. I slept well. Not because they were falling apart. Not because I had the upper hand. But because for the first time in years, my conscience was clear. They were simply facing the consequences of choices they made while refusing to listen. And I was free. The cafe was quiet. An independent spot in downtown Kingston, where the hum of the espresso machine was the loudest sound in the room. I'd chosen it deliberately. Neutral ground. Not Toronto. Not Ottawa, somewhere in between. A place with no memory attached. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Lucas Baudouin walked in, tall, mid-40s, hair graying at the temples but eyes sharp alert. He wore a simple blazer, no tie, and carried a leather folio under his arm. When he spotted me, he offered a warm, unforced smile. Ethan Fraser, he said, extending a hand. It's good to finally meet. Likewise, I replied, shaking it firmly. We ordered our drinks, he a flat white, me a long black, and sat by the window where early November light spilled across the tabletop. Lucas didn't waste time. Let me start by saying I've followed your work since the Bayfield days. That tenant system you built, it's legendary in our circles. Legendary's a strong word, I said, half smiling. Functional might be closer. He nodded, maybe. But in our world, functionality over a decade without major outages, that's mythological. I let the compliment sit without deflecting. I was learning how to accept respect again. Lucas got to the point. We're rebuilding Devlin's entire property management system. Our current setup is a Frankenstein mix of plugins, third-party APIs, and redundant processes. We've tried modernizing. Hired 3 young engineers straight out of U of T. They were brilliant on paper. And their system, sleek, beautiful UI. But it crashes if more than 100 tenants log in at once. I raised an eyebrow. Classic over-indexing on form. Exactly, he said. We don't need trendy. We need stable, scalable, secure. We need what you built, or better. I leaned back in my chair. So what are you offering? Lucas opened the folio and slid over a single page, an offer letter. It was generous, very generous base salary, 20% higher than my Veltria package, full benefits, stock options, 6 weeks vacation, and the title Chief Systems Architect. Not some vanity position. They wanted me to design, build, and lead from the ground up. Why me? I asked, already knowing but needing to hear it. There are plenty of younger engineers who will work for less. Lucas didn't hesitate, because those engineers haven't been through what you've been through. They haven't built under pressure, scaled as you did, or maintained stability for nearly 2 decades. We're not building a prototype. We're building a foundation, and foundations should be laid by steady hands, I said. I needed 48 hours to consider. He smiled as if he already knew my answer. Of course, but Ethan... He paused, tapping the table once with his fingertip. We're not asking you to fix something broken. We're asking you to build something better. That struck me harder than any dollar figure could. Driving home along Highway 401, I felt something I hadn't in months: momentum. Not obligation, not inertia, but actual forward movement. By the time I reached our place near the lake, the trees had turned crimson along the shoreline. Lydia met me on the porch, as she always did. How was it? She asked. I handed her the offer letter. She read it slowly, then looked up. It's good, she said quietly. Too good to be ignored. I nodded. That night, as I sipped my tea and listened to the wind whisper across the deckboards, I thought about what it meant to start over at 55. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't restlessness, it was clarity. The next morning, I called Lucas. I accept, I said simply. Excellent, he replied. Let's get to work. The same day, I received a text from Mark Fournier, who was still keeping a pulse on Veltria. They've lost access to 3 years of tenant data. Backup protocols failed. Westbrook Properties is threatening to walk. I wasn't surprised. The system I built had redundancies, but they required proper handling. I'd warned them for years. A few hours later, another call came. Monique Tremblay again. Her voice was tighter this time. Ethan, we'd like to revisit the consulting agreement. Higher compensation, greater flexibility. I didn't even ask how much. I just said I've signed elsewhere. I'm afraid I'm no longer available. There was a pause. Would you consider a fixed-term return? You could name your rate. I softened my tone, not out of kindness, but clarity. Monique, it's not about the money anymore. Later that week, Lucas invited me to Devlin's Ottawa headquarters. The space was open, natural light pouring through large windows, the walls lined with sketches and architecture diagrams. The energy was collaborative, not chaotic. I was introduced to the engineering team. Young, eager, but grounded. I didn't see arrogance, I saw willingness. Over the next few days, we began laying the groundwork for the new system. This time, everything would be documented. Every component would be backed by redundancy. No blind spots, no silos, no single points of failure. We weren't just building code. We were building trust, and in the background, Veltria's house of cards began to collapse. But I wasn't watching. I was too busy building something better. A week into my new role at Devlin Systems, I was standing before a whiteboard sketching the flow of a modular architecture that would become the backbone of our new platform. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, clean. There was no one breathing down my neck for faster rollouts. No flashy consultants hawking half-baked cloud solutions. Just me, a team that actually listened, and a shared goal: build something that would last. Mid-sketch, my phone vibrated. I glanced at it. A message from Mark Fournier. Veltria's in free fall. 3 years of payment data corrupted. No one knows what's salvageable. Ryan's melting down. I let out a breath through my nose, not a laugh, not pity, just acknowledgement. I hadn't sabotaged them. I hadn't built traps. I had simply built a system that demanded respect, and they hadn't respected it. The backup system at Veltria was designed to prevent data loss, but it wasn't automatic. It required monthly validation steps. I documented them privately in proposals to leadership, in emails they ignored, in budget requests they shelved. Every time I asked for a proper documentation team, I was told, next quarter. That quarter never came. Now they were paying for every one of those shortcuts. Later that day, Mark called Ethan. It's worse than I thought. Westbrook Properties is preparing to terminate their contract with Veltria. I stopped writing. Are you sure? Yes. Dominic Westbrook's personally calling clients to explain. Says tenant complaints are up, 40% payments are being misrouted. Legal's involved. I knew what that meant. Westbrook wasn't just another client, they represented close to 30% of Veltria's revenue. If they pulled out, Veltria wouldn't just lose face, they'd bleed cash. By Thursday, the fallout hit my inbox. Monique Tremblay again. Her email was longer this time. Carefully worded Ethan on behalf of the Veltria executive team. We'd like to formally request your assistance under a new contract arrangement. We're prepared to double the previous offer for a short-term engagement. Your insight is invaluable during this critical period. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Lucas Baudouin with a short note FYI. They're cracking. Lucas called within the hour. Think they'll survive it, only if they learn how to rebuild from scratch. He chuckled, poetic coming from you. Then more seriously, Westbrook reached out to us this morning. That made me sit up. Really, yes. They're evaluating alternatives. They're asking if we could onboard their portfolio within 90 days. I did the math in my head. Over 10,000 units, multiple provinces, dozens of integration points. It's possible, I said cautiously, but only with the right team and infrastructure. You'd be in charge of it, Lucas said. If we decide to proceed, we'll build around your plan. It was a massive undertaking, one that could cement Devlin's position as a national leader. Or crush us if we fumbled it, but I didn't hesitate. I'll get started on an outline. That evening, while Lydia chopped vegetables in the kitchen, I sketched out the early stages of the migration plan on a legal pad. I thought back to how Veltria used to operate duct tape solutions, undocumented dependencies, decisions made to appease investors rather than users. This time we would do it differently. Midway through, my phone rang again. Unknown number, I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call, this time from Connor Bayfield. I answered. Ethan. Connor said, voice heavy. I wanted to reach out personally. I know how things ended, and I know we didn't treat you right. I said nothing. He continued, Ryan's been removed as CTO, the board's in panic. Westbrook's pulling out, and we've got 2 more clients on the verge. If you're open to it, we'd like to discuss bringing you back, full compensation. Signing bonus, creative control. I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. Connor, I appreciate the gesture, I do. But I've committed to something else now. Something that respects what I bring to the table. I won't walk away from that. He was quiet. Understood. I had to try. After I hung up, I walked out onto the deck where Lydia was lighting candles along the railing. The lake was glass, still the sky tinged with indigo. She handed me a glass of red wine. Let me guess, she said. They want you back? I nodded. Offered everything but the kitchen sink. She sipped her wine. Too late, I smiled. Back inside, I finished the outline. Modular onboarding phased deployment. By region, full redundancy, real-time monitoring. And at the top of the page, in block letters, documentation first. Because this time we would build it not just to work, but to last. 3 days after Connor Bayfield's call, I sat across from Dominic Westbrook in a boardroom on the 12th floor of an office tower overlooking the Ottawa River. The view was stunning, Parliament Hill in the distance, snow just beginning to dust the rooftops. But Dominic wasn't here for the scenery, he was here for solutions. "Can you do it?" he asked, blunt and direct. "Can Devlin handle our entire portfolio by end of quarter?" I didn't answer right away. Behind me was a whiteboard filled with my notes. Regional breakdowns, integration points, projected load volumes. A high-level system diagram of what Devlin's architecture would look like if everything went to plan. "We can," I said finally, but not all at once. "It has to be staged. If we try to lift and drop 10,000 units in one go, it'll collapse under its own weight." Dominic leaned back, nodding slowly. "And you'd oversee it personally?" "Yes, but only if we do it right. Full documentation. No patchwork, no shortcuts. I've been down that road and it ends in disaster." He folded his hands. "I'll give you 12 weeks. I'll also fund the infrastructure expansion you need within reason. But if we go down again mid-transition, we're done. You understand?" I did that afternoon. Lucas Baudouin and I returned to Devlin's main office. He gave the green light. "You build the team, you set the pace," he said. "Just don't let it kill you." I half smiled. "It won't. Not this time." We started with hiring 3 senior engineers hand-picked from referrals and ex-Veltria talent folks who understood what failure looked like and didn't want to see it again. I brought Marc Fournier fully into the fold, naming him lead on database integration. His familiarity with Veltria's structure would be our secret weapon. I also insisted on something few companies budget for up front, a full-time documentation lead. Her name was Priya Anand, and within 2 days, she was building the scaffolding for how everything would be explained, maintained, and understood. By week 2, we'd secured dedicated servers in a private data center outside Ottawa, isolated, encrypted, physically protected, no public cloud, no one-size-fits-all platform. This was tailored infrastructure built like a lighthouse, strong, quiet, and designed to withstand storms. The migration plan itself followed a phased approach. Week 1 to 3, migrate Western Quebec region 2,000 units. Week 4 to 6, Central Ontario. Week 7 and 9, Eastern Quebec and Nova Scotia. Week 10-12, remaining northern and coastal properties. Each phase would be tested in a sandbox environment before going live. Every module would be mirrored, verified, and then activated regionally. If something failed, only a small region would feel it, and we'd fix it before moving on. But the most important part wasn't the code. It was the culture. Every morning at 9:00 a.m., we held stand-ups. Not just engineers, but documenters, testers, and ops leads. Every person had a voice. Every change had a rationale. We weren't just shipping product. We were building trust, line by line. Halfway through week 3, I received another email from Veltria's legal department, thinly veiled as a reminder about my non-compete clause and potential IP violations. I forwarded it to Lucas, who passed it to our counsel. We'd been careful, everything we were building was original. I'd left all proprietary code behind, but their fear was loud. That same evening, Dominic Westbrook called my cell directly. "Just got word." He said Veltria tried to reassure us they're rebuilding their platform with external consultants. But nothing's stable, payment errors are piling up. Tenants are threatening lawsuits. I wasn't surprised. "We're on schedule," I told him. Phase 1 goes live Monday, and it did. At exactly 6:00 a.m. on Monday morning, the Western Quebec region went live on Devlin's new system. Within the hour, 312 tenant logins were processed without error. 71 maintenance requests were created. Payments began flowing accurately, securely. By noon, Dominic called again. "It's working," he said as if shocked. "Everything just works. That's the goal," I replied. Internally, the team clapped in slack, no champagne, no speeches, just quiet pride. The kind that comes from knowing you're building something solid. 2 days later, we received notice Westbrook was terminating their contract with Veltria, effective immediately. They were moving fully to Devlin. The remaining 8,000+ units were now ours to migrate. Lucas walked into my office with the printed notice in hand. "This changes everything," he said. "You sure we can scale that fast?" I showed him the revised migration plan. "We won't scale fast. We'll scale right." He nodded. "Then you'd better get some sleep." I didn't. Not that night. I stayed at the office reviewing code, walking the halls, checking server logs. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something better and making sure it never broke. The call came the night before we were scheduled to migrate Westbrook's Central Ontario properties, nearly 3,000 units. I was still at the office reviewing failover scripts when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Ryan Caldwell. I didn't pick up. He called again, then again, finally. I let it ring through and opened the voicemail. "Ethan." His voice cracked from the first word. "Look, I know we haven't exactly. I know, but I need to be honest with you. This is bigger than I can fix. Westbrook's pulling out, the board's panicking, the consultants have thrown their hands up, the last stable backup's gone corrupted. They say we can't even reconcile rent payments from September. Please, I know we didn't part on good terms, but we need your help. Name your price." I sat there for a long moment, letting the silence of my office wrap around me. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because this was avoidable. Every alarm they were now scrambling to silence had been softly ringing for years. The next morning, I walked into Devlin HQ at 7:30 a.m. sharp. Lucas met me at the door with 2 coffees in hand. "They're done," he said. Without preamble, Veltria. He nodded. Westbrook's official termination hit the industry wires at 6:12 a.m. A few other clients are already circling us, and he handed me his phone. "Read this." It was an email from Veltria's legal department, directed to Dominic Westbrook, but CC'd to Lucas. It was a formal apology laced with desperate language and veiled pleas to reconsider. Dominic's reply was one line too late. Later that day, as we finalized the second migration zone, I received a call not from Ryan, not from Monique, but from Connor Bayfield. "Ethan," he said quietly, "Ryan's out." The board finally cut him loose after the auditors stepped in. "We've lost nearly 40% of our operational data. The external consultants want 6 months to rebuild from scratch, maybe longer." I said nothing. Connor sighed. "I've been asked to explore acquisition options. Quietly, Lucas is one of the names we're considering." That gave me pause. "You want to sell Veltria to Devlin, if they're willing." "We don't have many other options. Most investors are walking. The brand is toxic now." I leaned back in my chair. "Connor," I said slowly, "you do realize what you're asking, right?" "I do. And before you ask, yes, I know how this looks, and I know what we did. If there's a path forward, I'd rather see it guided by someone who knows what they're doing, someone who built it in the first place." I didn't answer right away. That evening, I told Lydia everything. She listened quietly, as always, then asked, "What would you need if Devlin moved ahead?" "A clean slate," I said. "No legacy politics. No ego and control over integration. It only works if we can re-architect the whole thing from the inside." She nodded, "Then tell them that don't go back unless you can build forward." 2 days later, Lucas called me into his office. "Justin Bayfield sent over preliminary financials," he said. "They're desperate. We could buy Veltria for less than a quarter of what they were worth 6 months ago." "Are you actually considering it?" I asked. He nodded. But only if you'll oversee the integration. Top to bottom, legacy, salvage, full migration, total rebuild. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked for the night to think it through. That night, I stood on the shoreline of Lake Ontario, wind cutting cold across the water, thinking not about systems or companies, but people. The tenants who deserved better. The young engineers who never got trained. The clients who were lied to. And the builders, people like me who were pushed aside in the name of efficiency. I thought about what it would mean to not just walk back into the system that discarded me, but to reclaim it. Reshape it. Not out of spite, out of purpose. So the next morning, I returned to Lucas's office with a single line. I'll do it, but we do it right. Full documentation. No shortcuts, every engineer gets trained, every module gets tested, and no one is indispensable. Not even me. Lucas extended a hand. Deal. 6 months after the acquisition closed, I stood beneath a new sign bolted above the glass entrance of what was once Veltria Housing's Toronto headquarters. It now read, Devlin Integrated Property Management. The culmination of a transition that had taken every ounce of experience, discipline, and quiet resolve I had to give. The acquisition had gone through at just under 24% of Veltria's peak valuation. The sale had been swift, silent, and by the end, inevitable. Most of the old executive team was gone. Ryan had disappeared from the industry entirely. A few familiar faces remained, but the energy in the building was different now. Tense in places, relieved in others, some looked away when I passed. Some nodded with quiet recognition. A few even smiled. I wasn't back to gloat, I was here to integrate Lucas, and I walked through the halls that once held so much weight for me. The server room was exactly as I remembered it. Rows of blinking machines I'd once configured myself. Want to go in? Lucas asked. I shook my head. We'll be migrating everything soon anyway. In the main conference room, the remaining Veltria staff had gathered. Some had been part of the original team I'd trained years ago. Others were newer, uncertain about who I was or why the transition was happening. Lucas introduced me. This is Ethan Fraser, he said plainly. Some of you already know him. He built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades. He's now our Chief Integration Officer and will be leading the technical alignment of both organizations. There was no applause, just silence. And then a few hesitant nods. I stepped forward. I'm not here to talk about the past. I began. I'm here to talk about what we build from here. Together. We're going to create something stable, scalable, and fair. Every process will be documented. Every team member will understand how the systems work, not just what button to push. No more information silos, no more single points of failure, no more guesswork. I paused, letting that sink in, then added, and no one will be left behind due to cost cutting. We build together, or we don't build at all. This time a few heads lifted. It wasn't inspiration I was looking for, it was buy-in. Slowly, I saw it begin to form. In the weeks that followed, the integration began in earnest. Mark Fournier led the data migration initiative. Priya Anand ran documentation like a well-oiled press room. Engineers from both sides began collaborating, first awkwardly, then fluidly, as we rewired more than just infrastructure. We rewired trust one afternoon. Justin Bayfield knocked on my office door. Got a minute? He asked. We stepped into the small courtyard behind the building, where a few remaining trees still held on to the burnt amber of late October. My father asked about you. Justin said he's still in Victoria, mostly fishing these days, but he saw the news. He was glad to hear you were back. I nodded, unsure how to respond. He always said, Justin continued, letting Ethan go would be the biggest mistake this company ever makes. Turns out he was right. I looked at him, not with bitterness, but with calm. It's not about who was right, I said. It's about what we do now that we've got the chance to fix it. And we did. 1 year after the acquisition, Devlin Integrated Property Management became the largest property management platform in Eastern Canada. Every property Westbrook's, Veltria's, Devlin's own now ran on the system I had designed from scratch with my team. Fully documented, fully redundant, built not just to serve, but to endure. But the real victory didn't come in the form of scale or contracts. It came in the form of something I had negotiated quietly at the end of the acquisition, a technical education division. Not a vanity project, not a side budget, but a fully funded internal academy designed to train young engineers in not just how to write code, but how to build systems that last. On a crisp winter morning, I sat in a glass-walled classroom, watching a group of 20-something developers sketch out system maps on whiteboards, asking questions I once wished someone had asked me. One of them raised his hand. "How do you know when a system is built right?" I smiled. "When you can walk away." And it still works. That afternoon, I cleaned out my integration office. Not with the bitterness of my departure from Veltria, but with quiet satisfaction. I wasn't leaving. I was just moving forward again. Before I left, I placed a small plaque on the bookshelf. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what keeps working when you're gone. In both life and work, there are values that simply can't be replaced just because someone cheaper comes along. The story of Ethan Fraser. A systems architect who gave nearly 2 decades of his life to a company only to be dismissed for being too expensive, is a quiet yet powerful reminder that experience, integrity, and deep understanding can't be measured on a spreadsheet. When Ethan left, the system he had built began to collapse. Not because he sabotaged it, but because they had relied on his quiet consistency far more than they realized. And yet, instead of chasing revenge, Ethan chose to move forward. With calm resolve, he built something better this time, with documentation, training, and respect woven into its foundation. The lesson is clear: real value doesn't need to shout. It reveals itself when everything else falls silent. For older viewers who've lived through career shifts, been undervalued, or made to feel like their time had passed, Ethan's journey is proof that your experience is not only valid, it's essential. You don't need to go back to reclaim what was lost. Sometimes the most dignified path is to start again and do it right. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe for more stories that honor wisdom, resilience, and the quiet power of experience. And if it touched something in you, just drop a 1 in the comments. That one small number tells me you're listening and that these stories matter.